Engineering, Magic, and Kitsune, Chapter 61, A Fond Goodbye. John reconnected the cabling, chuckling deeply as he thought about the sheer firepower this upgraded glove would possess. Sure, it was bulky, heavy too, yet the latter would be solved by levitation to the point where it might as well have been made of silk, and the former was planted by never wanting to be in melee combat to begin with. They were small sacrifices, all in all. With vastly larger batteries, John could push foci harder without worrying about depleting their reserves mid-fight. With a few extra modifications, he could likely figure out a way to use it as a backup battery for his warding and hover disk too. That was a design problem for later, though. Still, he could already see where he could improve the design. There was a surprising amount of space left inside, to the point where he could likely solve a long-standing issue given a sitting or two of extra work. Needing a second hand to swap out foci had long limited him, stopping him from using a shield or anything else to defend himself in case he had to pivot to another attack. With all the extra space, he could introduce a simple track for them to slide along, controlled internally by a short handle. The only issue was figuring out how to unlock and relock the foci from inside. Despite the overall surplus of room, the area around the foci aperture itself was at premium and necessitated care. At least it was simple to remove a section entirely. Modularity was definitely preferable given that John planned to keep upgrading it in the long term, so he ensured that it was baked into the core design. In any case, he was sure that he could make it all work with minimal extra fabrication, even if he wasn't sure of how yet. A politely cleared throat grabbed his attention, and he snapped to the door, crouching down low in preparation to spring out of the way. Standing in the doorway was just Yuki and Rin, with disguised interest in the former and a complete naked interest in the latter. "Hi," he said. "Hello, John. We didn't want to interrupt," greeted Yuki with a warm smile. "Cool. How long have you been standing there?" John asked. "Oh, not for too long," Yuki insisted, refusing to give him an actual time frame. "I heard your work was slowing down, so I came to check in, but you started back up again by the time I arrived." They were absolutely there for an hour, and he never noticed. Reddening, John looked away. What can I help you two with?" "Are you ready to take Aiki and Haru back?" Yuki inquired. "You could take Kaito along with us and drop him off with the militia at the same time. Then we'll have all the vulnerable mortals clear of where the Nagatsuno can weaponize them." Of course, this ignored that he was one of those vulnerable mortals, but he had yet to say anything about that to Rin, and hopefully would never have to. John glanced back at his unfinished gauntlet one last time, craving an extra safety its firepower would provide, like a security blanket. Unfortunately, finishing it off would take hours, and time was not of the essence. With his mage compass, they finally had a way to locate the Ofuda, and if their luck would hold, Kiku would be too busy checking on the damage the pair had done to intervene while they were searching for her precious barrier charms. "Is Rin coming with us, or is she staying behind to guard the place?" he hesitantly asked. Obviously, they had to leave at least one person behind in case Kiku got brave enough and thought about poking around the fort. But two would secure the place far better. On the other hand, the extra muscle Rin provided might be invaluable in case of an ambush. Yusuke was a complete non-option to bring along, of course. The reaction he'd get from the townsfolk would doubtlessly be unpleasant after they'd seen him get used by the tax collectors. "I'd like it to come," Yuki responded, and the azure scaled unbound at her side beamed a bright smile, tail swaying behind her as she perked up. Maybe he dreamed that Rin was older than him. He really should check with Yuki to see if that was a real memory or not. "All right," John said, slipping his gauntlet on and grabbing his pack, which was growing rather heavy with all the extra stuff he had to bring along recently. "Let's get this done, then." The next few minutes of prep work went quickly. Rin went to retrieve Aiki and Haru, while Yuki retrieved Kaito, and John was left all on his lonesome to get the hand cart for the couple's things. Of course, that did not mean that he was idle. The couple deserved a small gift for their bullshit that they had gone through. For the extra time before the others returned, John picked out a few things from his stores, loading a few bottles of what was pretty sure was a possible vintage of sake he still had stuffed away from an overturned cart a year back, and some nicely crafted tools. John vaguely remembered that Aiki was a woodsman, so a well-balanced axe with a head that was welded in place so it couldn't come loose would likely be appreciated, and it took only a few seconds to inscribe the man's name on it. Although he should probably not tell the poor guy about how the ghost of what seemed to be a sumo wrestler once fought him for it. He might think it was cursed. Even though John now knew that curses did exist, it felt pretty unlikely that the axe had one, given that he had made it and the ghost tried to steal it from him rather than it being one of the undead's original belongings. Haru was a seamstress, wasn't she? John packed 2 bolts of cloth of passable quality and newish homemade needles, some thread too, although he was starting to get a bit low on that. There wasn't anything particularly special about the needles, aside from being made rather good quality steel, so he hoped she didn't feel put off by her husband getting a fancier gift. While he was finishing packing, Ren had came around the corner, smiling jovially as the bound and gagged man bounced on her shoulder, folded over like a sack of particularly squirmy potatoes. A firm arm held perfectly in place despite the effort and muffled pleading, sparking a flicker of sympathy in John's cold heart. In the crook of her arm was a small bag of celery, which she awkwardly snagged a stalk from with her teeth before biting into it with a crunch. John blinked owlishly. "Hey, Ren, what do you have going on there?" he asked. "Oh, I realized I hadn't eaten breakfast and decided to grab something for the road, Sensei," she cheerily replied, tossing Kaito over her shoulder into the back of the cart with a loud thump, echoed soon after by a grunt of pain. "Would you like some?" she asked, holding out the jar to John. Yeah, sure, whatever. John didn't even care anymore. Even if he did, Kaito would live. It wasn't like Broadstream Town was that far, anyhow. Nodding, he grabbed a stalk of celery for himself, idly munching on it. "Thanks." In that moment, he missed being able to get spreadable cheese in a jar, something fierce. But this land seemed to hate the idea of dairy products. Although hyper-processed cheese spread could only be considered dairy in the loosest terms. Maybe everyone here was lactose intolerant. At least the rain had slowed to a drizzle, so they didn't have to worry about Kaito drowning in the back like that. Yuki was not far behind, quietly leading the skittish couple over. First was Aiki, awkwardly stumbling as he hefted a pile of their clothing and belongings, precariously balanced in his arms. By all means, it was a proper armful, but the sheer fact that it was all they owned beyond their house was depressing. Someone's whole life should not fit in their grasp. Not on his planet or any other. Perhaps he'd been spoiled by modern consumerism and the comparative ease of manufacturing personal items here, but he would like to eliminate such sheer poverty. Perhaps John couldn't change the world, but when he was more integrated with society, he could surely spare time to help at least one town. The place certainly hadn't drawn an easy hand. Next was Haru, and in her hands was a smaller pouch that she tightly clung to like a lifeline. Every few seconds she glanced at it, like it was a mirage that would evaporate under the afternoon sun when it elected to peek between rain clouds. Faintly, the bag clinked as she came to a stop by the cart. John's eyes flicked to Yuki, and Kitsune gently smiled. Ah, coin must have been her gift, then. Honestly, he forgot they even had money. It must have been from the chest Yuki had liberated a while back from the tax collectors. It might make them a target, though. Perhaps they should check up on them once they had their chance to settle. It wouldn't do to get them robbed. Oh, and they'd have to drop off a few things when they enacted their anti-nameless plan. John had snuck in time to make a few costs, and rigging up an extended battery for a welder was child's play. But there was still a bit more time until they could put it into action. Sadly, the lack of plastic here made the first plan unfeasible, but the second had the benefit of extra familiarity for the local populace. He still had to solve the logistical issues for that later. Nike gently placed all their worldly possessions into the cart, freezing upon seeing the additions. "My lord," he began, only to cut himself off as John raised a hand. "Think of it as a compensation package," he affirmed, allowing no argument. "We might have saved you, but that doesn't mean that this won't cause you issues down the line somehow. The new axe is made of high-quality materials engraved with your name, so you hopefully don't have to worry about theft. Well, the handle should last quite a few years. Feel free to stop by if it starts to wear out. It'll only take me about 5 minutes to make a new one. For you, Haru, I got some needles and supplies for you. There's nothing hugely special about them, but the cloth is fairly waterproof and thick. You might be able to make some good winter clothes from it." "Sir, your generosity knows no bounds. This is far too much," Aiki returned, stumbling over his words. "I can always drop it outside your door and walk away if you don't accept it," John responded as casually as he could, looking away so neither of them could see the grin growing on his face. Aiki went to say something, but Haru slugged him in the arm before he could, and he winced, shaking his arm as he glared at her. "Thank you, Lady Yuki. And Lord Hall," she said as she bowed, putting her husband hurriedly down to follow her. "Oh, I mean, of course, thank you two. You're much too kind," he hurriedly added, bowing before hurrying to the front of the cart. It's no problem. Let's get you two home, he replied with a smile. Oh, Rin, can I get you to pull the cart? Sensei, she sputtered, a bright red blush coloring her cheeks. That was probably a pretty weird request, wasn't it? Unbound with some sort of quasi-military mercenary nobility, right? Was it like asking some random lieutenant to carry a random bag, or would it be more like asking a duke? Individuals with superpowers didn't map cleanly onto Earth's hierarchies. Rin, what weather did we get yesterday? John asked. A pause. Rain, she hesitantly answered, lips drawn into a tight and her head slightly ducked like a child who hadn't been paying attention called upon by the teacher. He nodded. Not just rain, a downpour. The roads are almost certainly muddy to hell and back. How long do you think it would take poor Ike to pull the cart through all that? Yuki and I could do it, sure. He paused to sigh, absolutely lying out of his arse about his ability to get it done any faster. Well, maybe with telekinesis, or by freezing the path ahead of time, but that was beside the point. Yuki and I are also the best suited to detect attacks before they happen. It's not that I'm expecting anything, but I'd rather have two people focusing on keeping guard than one. Also, Yusuke would traumatize the pair, so he wasn't an option. They'd make it around the second bend, at most, before they sprinted off into the woods and got eaten by spiders. Rin's face relaxed before she quickly nodded. That makes sense, Sensei. It'll be done. At that, she headed over to the front, Nike awkwardly shuffling out of the way to make room for the dragon-blooded Unbound. Awkwardly, Ike bowed and muttered some form of thanks and apologies before heading back over to join his wife, casting the occasional uncomfortable glance over to Rin as she lifted arms of the cart. Let us depart, Yuki declared, walking over to the gate. John followed close behind. Want me at the head? John asked. The Kitsune nodded with a gentle smile. They'll take up the rear, then. Someone has to keep Rin company after that. You should hear her heart. Ah, it wasn't that bad, right? John asked. It was the logical choice. That doesn't mean that she's used to doing work for normal people, she commented, smiling. He chuckled as the Kitsune swung open the gate, taking the lead. Rin'll get over it, hopefully, John replied. Once he passed the gate, though, a sense of cold came over him as he went from ease to guarded in moments. There were no threats along the tree line that he could see, but that told him little. He drew his nameless and Kiku detectors, sweeping them over the tree line for any threats. Nothing. Clear, he muttered, as Ike and Haru came up behind him, a convoy forming behind him. As they walked into the forest, the branches of the trees loomed high over them, providing some shelter from the rain, but it only made the shadows grow even darker, hiding every potential threat. John's panning grew more frequent and more intense as he systematically panned over the area with every step, letting no stone go unturned. The mud was thick and heavy, grabbing his boots and threatening to drag him down. But he pushed on. Ike and Haru stuck close to him, saying nothing, and looking around at the forest in fear, bereft of the scant advantages John had for detection. Once they pushed through to a slightly clearer spot bereft of ambush opportunities, John glanced back to check the rest of their group. Behind the pair trundled the cart, drawn by Rin. Thankfully, with her unnatural strength, the wheels didn't stick. Sheer muscle power dragged it through even when the wheels started to catch. Having someone around with the strength of a draft horse was certainly useful. At the rear, Yuki serenely strolled, almost seemingly to float over the muck, her paws barely sinking in despite the greater mass. Idly, John wondered whether it was more precise application of the same magic that allowed them to levitate while meditating. Say, wouldn't that, combined with the extreme strength and durability magic seemed to provide, allow one to ignore the square cube law completely? There had to be some sort of giant monster out there, even surpassing the greater nameless in size. John abruptly decided to stop thinking about that and get back to work. The procession continued, the faint light fading as clouds thickened once more. The Stygian pits where danger may lurk only grew deeper. They couldn't turn back, though, not while they were so close. Soon enough, they rounded a corner, and the first buildings of the village came into sight. John sighed. He'd likely had to make the last part of the journey himself, wouldn't he? He could just give them a cart and retrieve everything later. Ugh. Then they would have to deal with Kaito themselves, who knew the poor bastard would actually make it to the militia before someone lynched him. Hell, it might even be their friends before they got their full story. The group advanced until Rin suddenly halted, clutching her head and starting to stumble back. Ah, there it is. He spun around, hurrying over to the Unbound side, ready to catch her as she wobbled. But thankfully the poor woman didn't collapse, only needing a steadying hand. My thanks, Sensei. I'm all right, she said, although the my was a bit too slurred for his liking. Put the cart down. Sit down, please, John said, not letting Ren argue, as he gently placed the cart's arms upon the ground before guiding her into a resting on its edge. Are you all right? Dizzy? Do you need to lie down? Sensei, she whined, but didn't push him away, even as she hunched over and reddened. She's fine, John, chuckled Yuki, in a rather distinctive vulpine manner, placing a hand on his shoulder. Right, he said, slowly getting back up, glancing at her one last time before looking back up to Yuki. I suppose the barrier extends out here, then. He glanced over to Ike and Haru, wincing. I might have forgotten to tell you two, but the priests of your local shrine did something a bit silly. Would you mind seeing if Sergeant Takada Yashiro from the militia is available? Please ask him to send an extra person, too. The two bowed and hurried off, passing through the invisible barrier that stopped someone who could bench press a boulder as if nothing were wrong. John's focus snapped back to Rin quickly enough that it almost gave him whiplash. Really, though, I know you have some celery tucked away somewhere, but that can't take care of all your hydration. Sensei, she piteously whined. End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.